During that family gathering, right after I turned down the idea of giving my $180,000 coffee shop to my younger brother, my dad threw a glass of red wine in my face. His voice was filled with rage. He yelled, "Watch your tone. I'm still your father, and you're not going to disrespect me in front of this family." After that moment, the whole room went silent. I just stood there, letting the red wine drip down my face and onto my shirt collar. That was also the moment I decided to walk away from my family. I left the house I grew up in to protect the little bit of dignity I had left. Stick around for the whole story and tell me, was I wrong for choosing to walk away and take back what was mine? Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca. I'm 30 years old and have worked in finance for 8 years. I live alone in a small house on the south side of Kansas City, Missouri. It's where you can still buy a neat and quiet home with $400,000. It's just enough to start an independent life without being crushed by financial pressure. This house is the result of years of hard work and saving. I don't spend recklessly. I don't take vacations. I don't chase after expensive things people usually use to show off. Even though my life is relatively stable now, there are times when I still feel lonely in this house. Not because I don't have a family, but because I decided to cut ties with them over a year ago. That happened after they asked me to hand over the coffee shop I owned, worth nearly $180,000, to my younger brother. I was born into a family with 2 children. I'm the oldest, and my younger brother's name is Blake. He's 4 years younger than me. Even when we were kids, I could see it. Blake was always the favored one, and not in the usual way parents love their children. It was the kind of favoritism where every mistake he made was brushed off, and every failure came with a ready-made excuse. My mom would say the teacher was unfair if he got a bad grade. If he quit a job halfway through, my dad would claim the work environment wasn't a good fit, not that Blake had done anything wrong. For me, it was the complete opposite. I was constantly reminded to be mature and set an example. That's what older sisters do. They said it so often it became a rule. I was never allowed to fall behind. I was never allowed to be tired or complain. If I stayed quiet, they said I was distant. If I spoke up, I was labeled selfish. I didn't get used to it because it felt okay. I got used to it because I knew one thing for sure. The more I expected from them, the more I was bound to be disappointed. Even though my childhood was a long stretch of being compared and mistreated, one person in that house always looked at me differently. My grandfather was the only person in my family who made me feel like I wasn't alone. He wasn't the kind of man who spoke in poetic words. He didn't hug me. He didn't constantly ask how I was doing. But how he showed love always made me feel seen and understood like a forgotten child quietly longs for. I still remember that whenever I visited him, whether unannounced or planned, there was always a cup of coffee on the table. Black coffee, no sugar, just the way I liked it. He used to say, "A kid like you doesn't need sweet, you need to stay sharp." Then he would quietly sit and listen while I talked. Sometimes he said nothing. He just nodded and sipped coffee, but I knew he was listening to every single thing I said. The pay was low when I had just graduated and started my first job. Everything came at me at once. Rent, bills, and even my old computer died in the middle of a report. I didn't tell anyone in the family because I already knew what I'd hear. Figure it out. You're an adult now. But the next morning, I got a notification. A small amount of money had been deposited into my account. It was from him. When I called to ask, he only said, "It's from my savings. Not much, but enough so you don't have to struggle alone." He never brought it up again. He never asked me to promise anything. But that was the first time someone in my family chose to stand beside me without expecting me to prove anything. Every Thanksgiving, when everyone gathered around the table and asked each other questions out of obligation, he was the only one who looked at me and asked, "Still writing in that little notebook of yours?" He was the only one who remembered I used to love writing. He was also the only one who kept every card I ever gave him when I was a kid. He placed them neatly in a wooden box next to his reading chair. To me, he wasn't just a relative. He was the quiet witness to all the years I tried my best and never got any recognition. But then 2 years ago, he left me too. I remember it clearly. It was an early week, and I had just arrived at the office when my dad called to tell me that he had passed away. At that moment, I knew I hadn't just lost a grandfather. I had lost the only family member who had ever stood up for me. 30 days after the funeral, the 4 of us gathered at Attorney Gavin's office to hear the reading of his will. That day, the lawyer clarified that my grandfather had divided his assets carefully and deliberately. Both Blake and I were to receive $200,000 each. My mom and dad also received a share, $100,000 each. The house that my parents and Blake were living in would be co-owned by Blake and me. In the will, my grandfather explained why. He wrote that because my parents had always shown favoritism toward Blake, he could not trust them to manage the estate fairly. He feared that if he left everything in their hands, I would end up with nothing after he was gone. After that, my dad asked why my grandfather's house wasn't mentioned. At that point, Attorney Gavin gave a short answer. Mr. Brandon sold the house a few months ago for $600,000. That's where the money came from. At that moment, I understood that my grandfather had planned everything. He wasn't being unfair to my parents or my brother. He knew that if he didn't handle it himself, I would be mistreated after he was gone. That's why he did everything quietly and carefully. He wanted to make sure I wouldn't be left with nothing. At that moment, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for him, and I made a promise to myself. I would use the money he left me wisely. I wouldn't waste it, and I wouldn't let anyone pull me back into the cycle of unfairness he worked so hard to protect me from. After transferring the $200,000 into my account, I knew I needed to use that money wisely. Working in finance, I understood that letting money sit for too long is the fastest way to lose value. A few days later, I started something I had been thinking about for a long time. I opened a coffee shop, not because I had a passion for making drinks or wanted a career change, but because I believed it could become a solid investment and provide a steady income if built correctly. I spent around $180,000 to launch the project. Just over a month later, the first coffee shop under my name officially opened in Kansas City. Even with the shop up and running, I didn't quit my job. I still went to the office every morning, met with clients, and worked in finance like usual. As for running the shop, I handed it over to a manager I had carefully selected and trusted completely. On opening day, I invited friends, co-workers, and close relatives. My parents came too, along with Blake. I thought maybe this time they would be proud of me. Perhaps they would finally see the effort I had put in and say something different from what I was used to hearing. But then, right in the middle of the celebration, while people were raising glasses and congratulating me, my mom turned to me and spoke in a light voice that carried more meaning than the words themselves. She said, "You should have given this business idea to Blake." I didn't respond. I didn't show any reaction. I just smiled like I always had because I had gotten used to my parents always wanting the best things for my younger brother, and I was never the one they gave those things to. As for Blake, after receiving the $200,000, he didn't choose to invest it or even put it into savings. Instead, he threw himself into a non-stop cycle of parties and indulgence, late nights at bars, spontaneous road trips with no reason, and meals at restaurants where he didn't bother checking the prices. Everything happened so fast that even our family didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. Within just a year, the money was gone. I didn't hear it from him directly. I found out through his close friends. Some messaged me, and others accidentally left clues through the photos they posted on social media. In those pictures, Blake often stood next to rented sports cars or sat at VIP tables with bottles of liquor lined up. Along with the photos were captions full of arrogant bragging. I didn't even have to ask. I knew exactly what had happened. What made it worse was that during one of his reckless nights out, he got a girl pregnant. She wasn't his girlfriend. It wasn't even a serious relationship, but the consequences were real, and no one in the family could pretend it didn't happen. That scandal happened just a year ago and was the beginning of everything. It set off the family drama. I had become the central figure in the entire mess before I knew it. 1 year ago, it was a weekend in April. I had come back home after getting an urgent call from my mom. After more than an hour of driving, I arrived around 10 o'clock in the morning. Cars lined up on both sides of the street outside the house, most belonging to relatives from my mom's side of the family. After finally finding a parking place, I walked into the house with a bottle of wine, just like my mom had asked me to pick up that morning. As I stepped inside, I was a little surprised. Besides the familiar faces of my dad, Mom, and Blake, nearly 20 relatives were scattered around the living room and dining area. The mood wasn't exactly tense, but it was clear that something was being set up. Then, among all the familiar faces, I noticed a girl I didn't recognize. She was sitting fairly close to Blake, looking shy, her eyes scanning the room like someone there for the first time. After a few greetings and a quick introduction from Blake, I discovered her name was Camila. She was his girlfriend. About 10 minutes later, the gathering officially began. At that point, I still thought it was just a simple get-together where Blake introduced his girlfriend to the family. Nothing unusual. But not long after, my mom got straight to the point. She stood up, looked around the room, and smiled as she announced that Camilla was 3 months pregnant. She said the family was planning a wedding for the next month. Right after that, the entire room broke out into applause. Everyone congratulated Blake, and I did too. I clapped my hands and turned to him, saying softly, "Congratulations. I'm thrilled to hear that." After the laughter and chatting started to settle down, my mom stood up again. She looked around the room, expressing emotion, and then spoke. "Our family is about to welcome a new member. Blake and Camilla are about to begin a new journey, and I believe they will do well." She paused momentarily, maybe to catch her breath or ensure everyone was listening, then continued. "But I also understand that starting a family is never easy, especially now that Blake still doesn't have a stable job. Camilla is expecting a baby." Then she looked directly at me. Her voice dropped slightly. "Rebecca, I know you've worked hard. I'm truly proud of everything you've accomplished. But today, I want you to think a little bigger. Think about your brother. Think about the child you're about to have in your life." At that moment, I knew where this was going. And just as I expected, she said it clearly without hesitation. Her voice rang out across the room. "I think you should give the coffee shop to Blake as a wedding gift, a gift for your brother and the baby on the way." After she said that, I could hear some relatives nodding in agreement. One even said loud enough for me to catch every word, "That's right, Rebecca's the older sister. She should take care of her own." I could feel the whole room leaning to one side at that moment. They weren't just waiting for my answer. It was like they had already decided I would say yes. I didn't respond right away. I sat there staring at the glass of wine before me, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I was deciding whether or not to say what none of them wanted to hear. And then, after nearly a full minute of silence, I lifted my head. I knew it was time to face it. I looked straight at my mother, kept my voice as calm as I could, and said, "Are you serious? That coffee shop is something I built with everything I had. I put $180,000 into it, and now you're telling me I should give it to Blake as a wedding gift? I'm never going to agree to that." She fired back immediately without hesitation. "Rebecca, your brother is unemployed and about to become a father. We're family. Can you let your nephew be born without anyone caring for him?" After she said that, I stood up. I didn't care about the dozens of relatives watching me. I looked right at her and asked, "Then where's the $200,000 he inherited from Grandpa?" Blake jumped in right away. His answer came so fast that it felt rehearsed. "I invested it with a friend, but the deal failed, and I lost everything." At that moment, I let out a slight laugh. It was quiet, but the contempt in it was impossible to hide. I looked at him and said flat out, "You're lying. You spent it all partying for the past year. Don't think I didn't know. Should I show everyone the pictures of you throwing money around?" Blake immediately lowered his head after I exposed him like that. Before anyone could cut in, I turned to my parents sitting across from me. This time, I didn't hold back. I made sure every word was clear. "I'm not giving him my coffee shop. If you want it badly, give me $200,000. I'll hand it over. You can do whatever you want. Give it to Blake. Give it to his kid. I don't care." Right after I said that, my father jumped up. He grabbed the wine glass from the table and threw it straight into my face. His voice filled the silent room, loud and furious. "Watch your tone. I'm still your father, and you're not going to disrespect me in front of this family." The moment the glass of red wine hit my face, the entire room seemed to freeze. The wine streamed down from my forehead, past my chin, and soaked into the collar of the white shirt I had put on that morning. The bitter smell of fermented grapes mixed with the sting on my skin. But the thing I saw most clearly was my father's eyes. There wasn't a trace of regret in them. A few seconds later, I slowly raised my hand to wipe my face. The movement was calm, almost like I was trying to shake off the last bit of restraint I still had. The wine continued to drip from my chin, but I didn't care. I looked around the room once, and all I saw were relatives avoiding my eyes, as if I were the one who had ruined the celebration. When my mother caught my gaze, she quickly looked away. Blake kept his head down and said nothing, and in that room, no one spoke up for me on that day. After that, I stepped away from the table and grabbed my coat. Just before I walked out the door, I said one thing. My voice was calm but firm. Thank you for reminding me where I stand in this family." Then I walked away. Behind me were whispers and quiet muttering like, "She's always like that." But I didn't look back, not even once. Driving home that day, I didn't feel angry about having wine thrown in my face. What I felt was a slow, quiet kind of sadness creeping in little by little, tightening in my chest until it felt like I couldn't breathe. I felt sorry for myself, for how hard I had tried to belong in this family, for how much I had wanted to be part of something that in the end had never truly seen me as one of their own. If someone had asked me what I thought then, I probably would have said, "I wish they loved me, even just 1/10 of the way they've always loved Blake. Just a little fairness. Maybe then I wouldn't feel this alone." Everything I have today, my job, my house, my stability, I built it on my own. Not $1 came from them. No one helped me when I needed it. No one asked if I was okay while I was struggling. I remember being 18. All my friends were excitedly picking out colleges. I quietly signed a student loan contract for a massive debt to go to school. I spent 4 years eating cheap meals, working late shifts, and barely sleeping. After graduating, it took me 2 more years to pay off that loan. Not one person in my family offered to help. At 27, after working like my life depended on it, I finally saved enough for a down payment and took on a long-term mortgage to buy my first house, the house I was now driving back to. Blake never had to work a side job. He never had to worry about debt. My parents covered everything for him, from tuition to living expenses, and when he graduated, they didn't just let it go. They gave him more money to invest. No matter how many times he failed, they kept protecting him. Through all those years, I never complained. I still came home for the holidays. I still sat at the table. I still chipped in for Thanksgiving. I still tried to be part of the family because I kept thinking maybe one day they would see me. Perhaps they would understand what I had been through. Maybe they would finally recognize my effort. But then today happened, and I realized they did not see me and felt entitled to everything I had. They didn't celebrate my success. They saw it as something the whole family should share, something they could take pieces from. That was the moment I knew I had to stop, not because I was angry, but because I couldn't keep wearing down my self-respect to hold on to the love of people who never truly made space for me in their hearts. About an hour later, I arrived back at my house. First, I walked straight into the bathroom, turned the water on full blast, and let the cold stream rinse off the smell of wine still clinging to my skin, my hair, and the memory of that morning. A few minutes later, I made myself a cup of black coffee. Even though it was the weekend, I still had a few leftover tasks to take care of. But the truth was, I just wanted to keep my hands busy so my mind wouldn't return to the image of that wine hitting my face. About 30 minutes after that, my phone rang. It was Aunt Lauren, who had also been there earlier. I picked up after a few rings. I didn't even get a chance to say hello before her voice came through, full of blame. "Rebecca, you went too far today. How could you treat your parents like that? They're still your family. Helping Blake is helping your parents too." She didn't ask if I was okay. I didn't think twice. The words came out on their own. "Then help my mother yourself. You're her family too, and if you can't, stay out of it." I hung up right after that, not because I was angry, but because I knew that saying more would only make it worse for me. After that call, memories of my grandfather suddenly hit me, so vivid that I could almost see him sitting by the window, quietly pouring a cup of coffee and nodding for me to take a seat. He might have said something soft and simple, but enough to help me feel calm again if he were still alive. And if he were still alive, I truly believe my parents, no matter how much they favored Blake, would never have dared take it this far. Right then, a sentence from his will suddenly echoed in my mind. I remembered clearly that he had written in the will that I owned half of the house my parents were living in. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I would do tomorrow. I arrived at Attorney Gavin's office at precisely 8:00 a.m. I brought a photocopy of the will he had given my family exactly 1 year ago, just in case he didn't clearly remember who I was or forgot what my grandfather had arranged beforehand. After a few polite greetings, I pulled the will from the folder in my briefcase, placed it gently on the table, and slid it toward him. Mr. Gavin took it, opened it, and read through it again. After carefully reviewing the document, he asked directly, "What do you need me to do?" I didn't think twice. The answer came out immediately, like it had been waiting since last night. "I need half the house." After I said that, he confirmed to ensure he hadn't misheard. "You mean you want to sell the house and split the money?" I nodded, my voice still calm. If they agree to sell, we split it 50-50, but if they want to keep it, they'll have to buy out my share at market value." Hearing that, Mr. Gavin nodded slowly. He didn't ask any more questions. He just picked up a pen and wrote down the details I gave him, including the address of the house, its ownership status, and the name of the legal co-owner, Blake. After a few lines of notes, he said just one thing, short and firm. "I'll handle this for you." About 30 minutes later, I left his office and headed straight to work. On the way, the Monday morning air felt unusually quiet, but deep down, I knew a storm was forming and everything would begin tomorrow morning when Gavin laid that official letter on my parents' table. And just like I expected, my phone started ringing nonstop the next morning before it was 7. Call after call, but I didn't answer a single one. I kept the phone in my pocket and let it ring out. Around 8 o'clock, I opened my contact list and blocked every number from them. Then I went into each social media account and blocked them there. Not because I was angry, but because I needed silence to work. I didn't want to let any emotion get in the way anymore. By around 5 in the afternoon, I drove home after work, but as I turned into the neighborhood, I could already tell something was off. I saw 4 people waiting in front of my house from a distance: my mom, my dad, Blake, and Camila. What surprised me a little was that they had brought Camila along. I figured they were going to mention the pregnancy, using the unborn child as their final card to try and sway me. As soon as I backed the car into the garage, before I could even turn off the engine, all 4 of them rushed over. My mom spoke first, her voice sharp and urgent. "Rebecca, you can't do this. How can you be so heartless and kick your blood out of their home? How can you let your nephew be born with no place to live?" I didn't react because that line was exactly what I expected. A child not even born yet, pulled into a fight between adults. And the one who used that child as a shield was the same person who had stood by as her husband threw wine in her daughter's face. I stepped out of the car, calmly locked the door, and looked straight at my mother. I spoke slowly. "I'm no longer part of this family. Don't forget who threw wine in my face yesterday. Right now, I'm just taking back what belongs to me." Right after I said that, Blake jumped in. His voice was loud and sharp, almost shouting. "You're selfish and greedy. You already have your own house and a coffee shop, and now you want to take this one and leave our parents with nothing." I let out a small laugh, not sarcastic, just bitter. Then I replied, my tone steady. "The will clearly says I co-own this house with you. It does not say I can't sell it. You have 2 choices. 1, buy my share at full market value. 2, sell the house, split the money, and we go our separate ways. That's it." I paused momentarily, looked at all 4 silently, and said the final words. "If you don't leave now, I'll call the police. This is my property. You're trespassing." After that, they went completely silent. None of them said another word. Maybe they realized I wasn't speaking out of anger. I was done, completely done, and I didn't want anything more to do with them. About 2 minutes later, my father was the first to turn and walk away. Then my mother followed. Camilla and Blake left soon after. I stood there watching them disappear down the street. At that moment, I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel angry either, just a strange, quiet peace settling inside me. 1 month later, Blake's wedding took place. Of course, I wasn't invited. And to be honest, I didn't expect to be. That morning, I went to work like any other day, trying not to think too much about it. But by lunchtime, my phone started ringing again. A few relatives from my mother's side sent me messages. Some were mildly critical, others were harsher. They said I was heartless for wanting to sell the house. They said I was a sister with no compassion. There was one message I still remember to this day. A cousin wrote, "No matter what you do, you should think about your parents. They raised you after all." I read that line and let out a long breath. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even that sad. Just tired, because the people who sent those messages weren't in the room that day. They didn't hear that wine glass hitting my face. They didn't see what it looked like when I stood alone, facing down my own family. I didn't reply to any of the messages. I didn't try to explain myself. Instead, I quietly blocked them one by one, calm and final. The truth is, I did feel sad that day. Not because I wasn't invited to the wedding, but because deep down I had hoped that after everything, at least one person in the family might understand me. But then I realized something. If I hadn't stood up for myself, I probably wouldn't have anything left. And more than that, I would have lost something far more important than money. I would have lost my self-respect. That evening, I sat in my coffee shop watching customers come and go, holding my usual cappuccino. Between the quiet conversations and the sunlight streaming through the window, I knew I had done the right thing, and that was enough for me to keep moving forward. 2 months later, the house was officially sold. Blake chose us to sell it and split the money evenly. Maybe he knew the outcome would be the same if this went to court anyway. The house was valued at exactly $500,000, and according to my grandfather's will, I received half. When the money hit my account, I didn't spend it. I didn't celebrate. The first thing I did was start planning my second coffee shop. After the unexpected success of the first one more than a year ago, I knew I was on the right path. Now it was time to grow. A few days later, I found a better location. The space had a clean, cozy design. I added a to-go setup this time. It allowed me to serve customers in the shop and made things more convenient for office workers. On the grand opening day of the second coffee shop, I didn't invite my parents. I didn't call Blake or any relatives because I knew they wouldn't have come even if I had invited them. About 4 months later, on a weekend evening, I was organizing paperwork in my home office when my phone lit up with a message. It was from Violet, my cousin. I opened it and froze for a moment. It was a photo of a baby sleeping peacefully in a cream-colored crib. The baby's face was tiny, calm, and much like Blake's. Right below the picture, Violet wrote only one short line, Blake's baby. I looked at the photo for a long time, then called Violet back. After a few polite greetings, her voice softened. She told me that after the house was sold, my parents gave the whole $200,000 they had received from my grandfather's will to help Blake buy another home. Violet said Blake didn't spend it on parties or his friends this time. He started working extra jobs, focusing more, and genuinely began taking care of his little family. When I heard that, I nodded. Even though Violet couldn't see me inside, I felt something ease, a slight relief. I was glad Blake was finally starting to grow up. But a few seconds later, a tight feeling crept in. It wasn't jealousy toward the baby in the photo, it was the realization that even now, my parents hadn't changed. They were still willing to give everything to Blake. He was still the one they poured out the best of what they had for. And me? In their eyes, I was still the one who could take care of herself, the one they didn't need to check on, the one whose silence was mistaken for strength, the one whose independence had been mistaken as not needing love at all. If someone were to ask me right now whether I regret the decisions I've made, my answer would be no. I don't regret it because more than anyone else, I know exactly what I've been through. The losses, the times I was dismissed, the moments I stood in a room full of family and still felt utterly alone. I chose to stand up for myself, not because I'm cold, not because I don't love my family, but because I knew no one else would if I didn't do it. Things in life won't get better just because you stay quiet. Silence doesn't always lead to understanding. Sometimes staying silent only gives others the impression that they can keep crossing the line. So, if you're hearing this story and you see yourself in it, I want to say one thing. You're not wrong for choosing to protect yourself. You're not wrong for walking away from a relationship that hurts you, even if that person is family. Don't let anyone call you selfish just because you refuse to live the life they expected from you. You deserve to be loved the right way. And sometimes loving yourself the right way means knowing when to say, that's enough. And before I end today's story, I want to leave a question for those of you who are still here listening until the very last moment. If you were me, what would you have done? Would you stay silent to keep the peace or speak up to protect what you truly deserve? Would you keep giving, or would you finally choose to hold on, not out of selfishness, but because you've already given too much? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. I genuinely want to hear your story and your point of view. Every time you share, it becomes part of this story too. And if you found today's story meaningful, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with someone you think needs to hear it. Thank you for staying with me until the end. I'll see you in the following story.